themselves. I mean, Iran is in the crosshairs. Saudi Arabia doesn't like Iran either. Iran and Saudi Arabia are energy rivals. And there was a moment after the Houthi demonstrated that they could tag Saudi oil fields with cruise missiles that the Saudis decided the price isn't worth it. We're not winning. This isn't working. And they had the Chinese come in and negotiate a peace between Iran and Saudi Arabian proxies. Because Saudi Arabia, with American planes, American weapons, sometimes American co-pilots, used to bomb Yemen, but they got a little too risky. So they would use mercenary groups of soldiers from the Sudans or whatever that they would use as cannon fodder. And the UAE was doing the same thing. The UAE is still doing that with the RSF in Northern Sudan in the Civil War in exchange for gold and mineral rights coming out of Western Sudan to the UAE. So it's a complicated thing happening, but Saudi Arabia and Yemen were fighting all the way back when Nasser was head of Egypt. Okay. And it was while Nasser was involved with the conflict supporting Yemen that the Israelis preemptively attacked Egypt and started the 6-Day War, where they annexed a bunch of land. So this is where the lines have been drawn for quite a while. Saudi Arabia, if you look at it geographically, it's got Oman and Yemen on the whole eastern half. So it has to go to the Red Sea or the Strait of Hormuz for all maritime trade. And it's a little history on Saudi Arabia. The majority of the major ports are all in the north on the Strait of Hormuz. And that's why you see little countries carved out, Bahrain and Qatar and they're all in the north hugging the Strait of Hormuz. Why? Why don't they just build them on the Red Sea? The reason was, prior to oil being discovered in the 30s, the big thing was the pearl trade. And so the pearls that's where they are. So the oysters and things, they would go and they would harvest them. So most of their infrastructure, their major ports were all built around and developed for the pearl trade. So when there is oil, you just go to the pre-existing port and ship it out. You don't build a brand new one. So most of their roads, everything went from the center to the north, and the northern areas all become little fiefdoms because of this trade. Now, they did build a port down toward the Red Sea eventually, but what they'd really love is not to be at the mercy of having to go past Iran and the Strait of Hormuz or going through the Red Sea and having to go through Yemen. They'd love to have a pipeline all the way east, right through Yemen, directly to a deep water port, and so they could go east to west with it. But Yemen's like, nah, pay us then. And they're like, no, how about we take it? And so it's energy and da-da-da. But they don't tell you that. They say Sunni, Shia, some theological BS about the lineage of Muhammad, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not. It's about energy. So that's, in my opinion, what's going on there. But the little bit of a history lesson with the pearls and stuff, I probably went back a little bit too far. But you have to understand, Saudi Arabia and Yemen have been going in cyclical wars since like the 50s. Okay, so this was just another one, and there is a little bit of the religious beef because they both engage in I'll call it theocratic nepotism, where they only hire their own groups. All of Yemen is not even Shia or not even Houthi, but enough of it is. And it's the whole thing's a mess. Like Aden used to be a country, it's now a city when the Brits were running it. You can blame this on Sykes-Picot and a lot of things. It was destined to fail just in the way that these countries are carved up out of the Ottoman Empire. It was not structured around the tribes and political positions, the people that lived there. It was just drawing boxes around resources, and it was never going to work. And we've seen the results.
All right, folks, get your questions in. All of Orion's links are in the description. I'm going to put them in the live chat, so please support his work. Disco 1000. What happens to Lebanese Christians now?
I mean, Lebanese anybody. Israel kills civilians. In their war, they murdered thousands of people. Most of them Muslim, some of them Christian. When they bombed the Christian areas of Beirut, they did that in 2006 as well. And they're doing it now. But Christians, in addition to being bombed by Israel, who could easily restart their war with Hezbollah soon, or also being attacked by HTS terrorists. I hate calling them HTS because they're not a liberation army. I'll call them Al Nusra. Well, then, you know what? We'll just call them Al Qaeda because they're just an offshoot of ISIS. They are targeting Christians in Syria and in Lebanon. And a lot of Christians who did live in Syria, and Druze as well, and Alawites, fled to Lebanon. But now the Turkish-backed terrorists are attacking Lebanon. Fortunately, that didn't go too well. Hezbollah created piles of bodies out of these terrorists. So their ground game didn't work, but they still are killing Christians, and they're really slaughtering them in Syria. They know where they live. They're going house to house and catching them unarmed. There is ethnic cleansings of Christians, of Alawites, of really even other Sunni. Anybody that isn't of this hardcore Wahhabi Salafist version of Islam is being murdered, and it's mostly other Muslims.
So HTS are our friends now. I mean, the friends of the neocons, the military-industrial complex.
Not my friend, but yeah.
And Yemen, the Houthis are the terrorists. It's all been turned upside down.
The people standing up for humanitarian aid and opposing the terrorists are the bad guys. And the ones running around killing Christians and Alawites and throwing grenades in windows and all that and dragging people behind trucks and setting museums on fire. They're our friends. Isn't that something?
What hope does that give us for the future?
I guess you can just hope that Yemen wins. I mean, I don't see any policy changes with this cabinet. Even Tulsi is the bad Tulsi. She was the most reasonable one he had. They got her. They got to her somehow. We do have some politicians in the U.S. They're not in Trump's cabinet, but like congressmen like Thomas Massie, who can speak truth to power. And we have our retired congressmen like Ron Paul. There are some good guys that you can support and push the narrative. And then we have alt media like Jimmy Dore, as you just showed, and Shaun Attwood, this show, my show, telling you what's up. And you know, Judge Napolitano and Scott Ritter and Larry Johnson, Ray McGovern, Mersheimer. There are people, Danny Davis, as we mentioned earlier, who ought to be in the cabinet. You know, that's my dream cabinet, something like that. Doug McGregor, Colonel Wilkerson. Yeah. Oh yeah. We just imagine if that was the cabinet. That's who ought to have positions, but no, we get Rubio and Hegseth and Bondi. I wish we had Matt Gaetz.
So Carol wants to know whether you think under these circumstances is Trump doing a good job?
Doing better than Biden.
We'd be at least we don't have already.
At least we don't have pregnant men. You know, no more men on the women's sports teams. I mean, these are easy. He's doing better on the border. He's doing better at gutting USAID. And that's a big deal, cutting that and yellow journalism. Cleaned up a little bit of Social Security, cut some waste there. He's not doing a very good job, but at least he's attempting to get peace in Ukraine. Biden was just full on, I won't even talk to the Russians. So he's doing better there. Better policy on North Korea. So I can point to stuff that he's doing, moving the ball the way we want. But on the Middle East, he's just been a disaster like the rest of them. Sad to say.
They want to know who's your favorite president to date and why.
Washington or Jefferson? I don't. It's hard to decide. Why? Well, you know, Jefferson did a lot of good things before he was president. So just all around. I mean, they wrote the Bill of Rights. That's a big deal. Glad we have that. You know, Louisiana Purchase. That was a great move. He ended the transatlantic slave trade. That was a good move. He tried to end slavery in Virginia when he was governor, but he failed by only a couple votes. Wrote the preamble as well. Jefferson was good. He really reduced the size of government. Believed in states' rights. He was a G. But then you look at George Washington, you know, who helped win the Revolutionary War, really had nothing to look at. Like he had to set the precedent. Voluntarily resigned after 2 terms, which set a trend that lasted all the way to FDR. Yeah, I love the quote from Washington. He said he was listening to like Hamilton and Jefferson arguing about something, and he went into the adjacent room and he got, "My God, I'd rather be back as a farmer in Virginia than be proclaimed king of the world." But he knew to get out of entangling alliances. His farewell address is just perfect on warning of the formation of factions and what was coming, because that's exactly what happened. So he was good. Coolidge was a good president. Eisenhower kind of figured it out his very last year in office. Same with JFK. Unfortunately, he didn't get to. JFK and Reagan both cut taxes. They increased tax revenue by cutting taxes. You're like, how do you increase the revenue without increasing the tax? Like, because they actually stay in the country. Oh, there's his the military industrial complex. That's great. Farewell address.
The vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
Wow, he nailed it, didn't he? And, what's your thoughts?
He sent UN peacekeepers into Gaza after the Suez crisis, where the British, the French, and the Israelis preemptively attacked the Egyptians and annexed territory from Palestine. He put in peacekeeping forces, and they were there for 10 years. And weeks after they were removed, Lyndon Johnson gave us the 6-Day War. As soon as he was out of there, Kennedy was keeping up with Eisenhower. And Eisenhower started the Atoms for Peace program. He was trying to do nuclear freeze. That's why I say his last year in office, he doesn't compare to Jefferson or something. I'm just saying recently. I really like to think about that question because I've never thought who's my favorite president, but off the top of my head is what I'm saying. Eisenhower got it, and Kennedy got it. He said, okay, because Kennedy had worked on a test ban treaty. He even had the French on board, which is very hard to do. And, they tried to kill Charles de Gaulle a couple times, and then they did kill Kennedy. And then they killed his brother, who was investigating John's death. I just did a show on that. It's sad. But yeah, the final year of Eisenhower, a couple years that Kennedy had, Coolidge, Jefferson, Washington, maybe Madison. Yeah, Garfield's another one they murdered that never got to do. He was going to tax churches, and they didn't like that. But that would have got us out of debt. We've had mostly bad ones, though. That's the problem. It's been you can't get worse than Lincoln, the real Lincoln, not the fairy tale one. You can't get much worse than Biden and Obama. George Bush Jr. was horrible also. It's in my lifetime, it's been bad. The only two semi-sane presidents in my life were Carter and Reagan. And it's just been downhill. Straight downhill. Bush Sr., bad. Clinton, worse. Bush Jr., worse. Like kept going lower, lower, lower. And Biden stole his presidency. I'm convinced 2020 was stolen. Trump got in and couldn't get anything he wanted done because the first time he was in, his cabinet was completely against him. The media is completely against him. They did the Russiagate BS the whole time, Charlottesville, all that. So he couldn't get done a lot of things he wanted to get done. He did cut corporate tax rates, pulled out of the Paris Accord. There's some stuff he could just do unilaterally as a president, ended NAFTA, and it did improve the economy, but then they got hit with COVID. So COVID wrecked everybody. So you never got to see what Trump presidency would have been like without that. But for the first 3 years, he was gas was like $1.84. It was working. But now he's in there and like, okay, you learned from last time, right? You're going to pick a better cabinet and but he's listening to the Israelis. And so he's got it. We're going to end up in a war with Iran, and it's going to ruin his legacy. Like he could become the best president since Reagan, the best president since Eisenhower or whatever, if he would just do 10% of the stuff he promised, like a cyber bill of rights, no more banning people for political speech. If he were to do that, if he could really, you know, he is trying to do the deportations and stuff, and activist judges are fighting him on that. I know. But it's like, I don't care. I don't care. You are murdering 2 million people in Gaza are just they're being starved to death right now. And you're on the side of the psychopaths. That just undoes any goodwill anywhere else, because there's nothing worse than that. And it will have blowback.
A lot of people are asking, are Trump's hands tied?
I mean, I think it's obvious they are. It is possible that he's just a moron. And they did try to shoot him twice. That probably got him in line. Like, we're going to miss the third time. I don't know, but whatever it is, if it's just the money, you know, from the Adelson and UDP and stuff, all those hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's why he obeys. Or it's more sinister. It's like, I almost said it, almost like the Jeffrey stuff, the map on the wall, that kind of thing. Very possible.
Disco wants to know, can a non-psychopath rise to president?
Yeah, I don't think Carter was a psychopath. Neither was JFK. Like, you mean nowadays with the TV and the way it is, it's very hard. It's very hard to even get one in Congress. There's a couple, but it's hard to even get a governor that doesn't do the pay to play. But it happens now and then. So it'd have to be almost a campaign completely done on social media, because the establishment media would never support a non-psychopath. The problem is nowadays, the social media is just as censored. The only major social media that has a degree, and I'm going to emphasize only a degree of free speech, is X. And they still shadow ban and lower your reach too. We're going to have to get Telegram and Substack and Rumble and these other things built up big enough to where they can threaten the system. Through that, you could get more Thomas Masseys. You could get good Tulsis or whatever. But you really need to crack down on these compromise operations, which is what I'm doing. I'm focused right now on this Lee case that's got like 3,000 Johns. I mean, the rot in our system. Like, why are you so addicted to prostitutes? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Just find a sugar baby if you're that desperate. Something. something's wrong with the culture. You have all these perverts in government, but that's who gets supported. Once you compromise, they'll give you all the money and make sure you get in because you're going to obey. Sad to say.
Exactly.